to the Sacred Commerce podcast. This is episode 7. And today, Emmanuel and I are joined by my great friend and Iman's great friend, Kevin Ryerson. Welcome, Kevin. So good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the program.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you.
Excellent day.
Yes, as Iman would say, it's a great joy. We used to call Iman a fundamentalist, remember?
Yes.
Fundamental.
Yes.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be participating today, as he would say too.
Yes, participation. He cut it in half and spelled it P-A-R-T-Y-sipation.
Yeah. Participation. Yes.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I would definitely say that you are one of the people that he enjoyed the most in this lifetime. I feel like you're one of his, handful of closest friends in this lifetime. And it always gave him great joy to be with you and to co-create with you. And Sacred Commerce is in a great, in a huge way, really down to our relationship with you and the trip that we took on our honeymoon when you and one of your spirit guides, Anton Ray, introduced us to the god Bess and the concept of the merchant priesthood, and that really lit a fire in us that continued on through the 30 years we had together. So yeah, it's a great joy to be able to discuss this with you today and to discuss it as an overview that we have. I don't know how you have experienced this with departed loved ones in your life, but I have found that there's this extraordinary kind of overview of a life with somebody that you have at the moment that they depart, because that's it, that it's a closed chapter at that point. And you see it as like a painting. It's a finished painting, and you have a perspective on it that you don't necessarily have during it, because it's not finished yet. And I would say that spirit and you, and maybe you want to introduce a little bit your work to our audience as you share this, but I think that spirit had quite a big role in Iman and I's union in this lifetime, and maybe you can speak to that, but also introduce your work.
Okay. Well, first of all, yes, I've been very close to you and Iman for years now, and it's also wonderful to meet with Emmanuel, and be here on the program. People may be familiar with my work from the work that I did with Shirley MacLaine, the activist and actress, known for her, her consciousness expression and movement. And essentially, there was also her book Out on a Limb that people may be familiar with, but also the television broadcast Out on a Limb. And essentially, my work as a trance channel is to set aside what is considered to be the critical analytical part of our consciousness, and to allow the higher levels of intuition to be able to express through what are called altered states of consciousness, or again, to me, a meditative state. People may be familiar with this through names like Edgar, Cayce, perhaps Lazarus, Jack Purcell. They may be familiar with it through, in Europe, the name Rudolf Steiner, or perhaps the Seth material. And in my particular case, the sources of guidance that come through the meditative state when people place questions or inquiries in their areas of needs and exploration does come through a principle that I refer to as ancestral intelligence, and or what is more traditionally known as spirit guides and teachers. This is the idea that these are personalities of persons that we have known in other times and cultures through the phenomena of reincarnation, our own past lives. And in those lifetimes, we have known those individuals as friends, just as we're communicating as friends here. And essentially, we continue to know them then as our spirit guides or teachers who are there to benefit us and to benefit humanity through insights that they may communicate through. With Ayman, that work included works I'm certain your audience are familiar with in the areas of sacred commerce, which was Ayman's intense interest in the idea that human industry, human commerce, had a sacred dimension to it. It wasn't just merely a matter of crunching numbers and moving goods and services around, but that could be done more consciously. And one way that that was expressed through his intense interest in what is now known as emotional intelligence. In fact, Ayman can be credited as one of the key persons who helped popularize the concepts of emotional intelligence, which have been preserved in books such as Sacred Commerce, and also his now worked with book called Executive EQ, which is actually used in university course studies in the area of commerce and emotional intelligence, a book written for executives and captains of industry. So those are areas that Ayman had explored, but also the family journey. You know, he explored personal relationships that he had with family members and people he was close to, such as yourself, Emmanuel, and of course, my godson, Aslan. And so that journey that people take advantage of when it comes to channeling and working with spirit, I would say yourself and Ayman worked with it very intensely and maybe on both a personal as well as a practical level in service to humanity.
Chills from bottom to top as you say that. I really, that was one of the things that came to me actually the night that he passed, was that the real work that we did together in this lifetime actually was in relationship and was in what we worked out together between us. And, you know, I think it's often said that relationship is one of the biggest evolutionary catalysts if you do it where you're not, you know, compromising and stuffing everything, but if you do it and face what comes up. And certainly both your friendship and also your guidance through spirit, I think, was a big reason that, you know, we made it. There is bumps in the road, and when you have as many differences as I always like to say that Ayman and I had every difference in the book of why you wouldn't get married, you know, and that those very differences are actually exactly what catalyzed such a huge growth for both of us in this one lifetime. Because if we didn't face them and make our way through them, we couldn't stay together. And so we had to face so many of the things that are fundamental to every relationship, you know, chauvinism, jealousy, you know, all of these things. And we had to, because not only we were married, but we were business partners, you know, like we got married on such a profoundly deep level. But maybe you can share a little bit about your influence in that union.
Oh, well, first of all, as to my influence in that union, I really like to think if you guys are soulmates, okay?
Yes, I agree.
You know, I think it's your soulmates, but you know, the interesting point you're making about differences is that that's often the case with soulmates. There's the idea that in soulmates that, you know, that there's always this romantic super compatibility, et cetera, et cetera. But soulmates come together for a purpose of a powerful work and a powerful creation. And I think that applies very much to your and Ayman's, you know, relationship. is,
Absolutely.
is what it boils down to. So this I see this as soulmates, both on the romantic level, and simultaneously I see it on this powerful creative level, because both of your personalities can be so well synergized into the works that you brought together, like the area of sacred commerce. It was both of yours examining that phenomena and that journey that brought about that particular work, which again is that service to humanity, because that book goes out there and it's so, so transformative. As to the romantic side, one of my favorite stories that I shared with you is that you, I, and Iman all somehow, by some miracle, got almost private time to the inner access of Stonehenge. And in Stonehenge, without particularly noting the time of the month or anything else, there was the inspiration to maybe bring you into sort of a spiritual union, kind of celebrating
Sacred marriage, kind of a sacred marriage.
Sacred marriage, sacred union. And what was so fascinating about it is that we were right there in Stonehenge at sunset. And I had not made no special note of the time, but at the very moment that we were conducting the union, my sort of acting in the capacity as a channel and then sort of like a minister, might function. The sun was just going down, and all of a sudden we were all thunderstruck because the full moon was rising on the other horizon. And I thought to myself,
1 and 1.
So here we are in the middle of Stonehenge, one of the great astronomy vortexes, not particularly known to any of us that we went there at a planned time or anything. This union was occurring between, a man and a woman, male and female, and then here's this celestial witness that occurs of the sun going down and the moon rising. And essentially, that to me was just, it was a phenomenal timing or synchronicity. And I couldn't think of a better testimony than the union, that you and I had and shared together. Wow. The idea of the sun and the moon cooperating together and creating
both in their fullness.
Yes,
at equal points in the heavens. It was literally like this, either side of Stonehenge.
Absolutely.
And of course, Stonehenge being, in terms of the Earth's vortexes, the heart chakra of the planet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So to bring us together, and so what I was referring to, just for our audience, is that it was Kevin that suggested this union, and Iman and I both thought that was a beautiful idea and agreed to meet him there for this union. And what is also, I think, quite kind of slightly charming about the whole thing is that neither of us thought of telling our parents, our kids, our family, our friends. We just kind of got married, and it was like a couple of months later, and we probably didn't take it as seriously as how much it really felt. So, once it had happened, it was like, oh yeah, that's it. We're united, and a couple of months later we were like, shit, we need to tell our parents. Which I think is probably quite rare.
Well, the idea is that there are multiple encounters that soulmates have. And in your particular case, we actually have some evidence that meets a certain criteria. Another person I worked with over time was by the name of Dr. Walter Simcoe. He was a medical doctor, but he was a researcher into the phenomena of reincarnation that I had mentioned earlier, where we know our spirit guides and teachers, but also where we know the journey with what we call our soulmates. And Dr. Simcoe had collected something like 1,300 individual case histories of people who had reincarnated and who carry over many of their attributes from one lifetime to another. And as a medical doctor, he was as thorough in his explorations many times as Iman was, you know, in his details about economics, which is, you know, excellent exploration of the subject material that they put their minds to. I sort of see them as sort of like almost intellectual peers. And in the case of reincarnation, one of the case histories that came up was you and Iman. And, and in Dr. Simcu's work, he has what he called 10 principles of reincarnation. That would be the equivalency of a forensic study of personality and human traits that would stand up into a court of law to establish a person's identity. And essentially, your and Iman's case made that criteria.
Wow.
And the case that I'm talking about is that there is a unique statue of a couple in Egypt. I believe, if I remember correctly, it may exist in the museum to this very day. Yes. And it was suggested by Antoine Ray, and I believe the names of the individuals were given. And when you and Iman went to explore the idea of this past life that had occurred in Egypt, this particular figure had been a member of the temple treasury, which would have meant he, in that lifetime in Egypt, and you in that lifetime, were people who were entrusted with the sacred commerce of Egypt. And essentially, Iman, when he went and saw the statue, he said he got like you know, he kind of got chills because he's going, oh my goodness, you know, I'm looking at myself, you know, and it looks like I, you know, and it looks like you. And then Iman, in his mischievousness, once informed me, he's going, he says, what I really liked about that past life when I saw that statue, he said, it looked like me. And he says, and it gave me chills. He said, however, he said, when I saw Rowan, you know, in that past life, because I could see that statue, I was really happy to see she had the same great figure down through the thousands of years. And then that impy smile on his face, you know, that only Iman has. And I'm certain your audience is familiar. She said, but boy, I really like that she had this really great figure down through the picture.
Great.
So, you know, they talk about,
classic.
You know, they talk about a girl, you know, keeps her figures down through the years. You know, you've had your girlish figure down through thousands of years.
Millennia.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I hope your audience.
What is your secret, Rowan?
Working with the plant kingdom. Apparently in that lifetime, I spoke to Anton Ray a couple of times about it. Anton Ray being the Egyptian priest that works through Kevin and that helped us massively with the stories of the merchant priesthood. But he talked to me about my work with the botanical gardens at that time, you know, at those times, and reigniting some of those dreams in this lifetime. And that really is starting to happen more and more. In fact, on the next Egypt trip, which is now an annual pilgrimage, our particular group is starting a nursery for the Blue Lotus, which, you know, we all share the dream of it being returned to the Nile in our lifetime, hopefully, but whenever it should happen. So that's really exciting to be working in that way with the botanicals. We also have one of the greatest botanical alchemists of our times, John Steele, coming with us, which is also very exciting to be able to share that space with him.
That's great. So now we'll get your beauty secrets down through the centuries. You know, from one incarnation to the next. As you know, it says, "Look fabulous from one incarnation to the next."
Gives a whole new meaning. Yeah, I'll have to get some more downloads from Anton Ray about this, about the botanicals used at that time period.
Yeah. You know, returning to the subject material of sacred commerce and working with Iman on that, you know, and how it was connected to Egypt. is that sometimes when I'm teaching classes, I point out that we have plenty of history, the history of war. You know, this battle contributed that machine, this technology was advanced by that war, et cetera, et cetera. And Iman and I and yourself would often have conversations about how there need to be more of a history of peace. And that to me is what sacred commerce can be, because most economic theories say that, you know, most human conflicts arise out of limited resources. And in this particular case, the abundance paradigm, you know, that each of you, in both Emmanuel and yourself and Iman, and I like to think of my participation in spirits, that is Antun race, participation in advancing a resource for people where they could begin to conceive of a history of peace. And one of those eras of the history of peace that I point out, and that Antun points out because he lived it, was that of Hatshepsut. When you compare Egyptian art, traditionally it shows pharaohs in powerful positions of essentially war chariots, those they've conquered, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Hatshepsut's memorial temple is unique in the sense that her entire legacy for the future of Egypt, and by extension humanity, is that the memorial temple has on it an image of a trade action that she carried out with what was known as the land of Punt. And there the image is of a huge ship, specially designed for the purpose of trade with other nations beyond the borders of Egypt. And this was unique because Egypt at that time did not have ocean-going or open water vessels. So this entire ship was uniquely designed for that purpose. And what is emphasized in this huge ship is all the goods and trades that Egypt is going to benefit from, and all the goods and trade and economy that the land of Punt, and by extension other nations, because Punt was like this huge seaport that had dealings as far away as Afghanistan and even Australia, and to varying degrees even Ireland by archaeological evidence. Wow. So when people go to Egypt, this image in the memorial temple is a blueprint for peace. And the only place you see armies is that there are these little tiny figures down in the bottom of the mural. And that, I think, very much contributes to the idea that there is a history of peace, and we have these blueprints that we can draw on from that. And even the tangible resources of the botanical garden that was being mentioned, because those are medicinal plants that we are still working with today, and a great deal of our holistic health is based in.
Yeah.
Incredible. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about this, you know, in the work that you did with these past lives and current personalities. There was one of the people that was covered in that book is someone that I've known from my life in this lifetime. I don't know, maybe other lifetime, but the figure of Marianne Williamson, who's been quite a spiritual force in the Western world, and you know, I mean, based in America, but her books have been translated, and she's really touched a lot of people around the world. And funny enough, she married me and my first wife in 2000, and that's not a marriage that completed. I mean, it did complete. It finished a long time ago. But then I volunteered for her over the years and was involved in her Sister Giant spirit and politics events, and have really been tracking her over the years. And was just really curious about that it said in the book that she was a reincarnation of Jane Addams. You know, that's incredible. And she's now announcing another run for presidency, primarying against Joe Biden during a time where I think is just, Our current times feel like what people thought 2012 was supposed to be like.
Mm.
It almost seems like 2012 was a real thing for me,
Mm-hmm.
but the times that are happening now feel much more like the removing of the veil, and there's incredible leaps in technology right now with some of these
Mm-hmm.
large language models. I've been working with a lot on the writing front, on the image making front. Like, what's going on right now? Does what speak to the Marianne angle, speak to the technology piece, the like what's going on?
Okay. Well, my perspective on Marianne Williamson is by her own statement that she really enters the presidential debates with a purpose that if she was to achieve the office, of course, that would be very powerful. But at a minimum, she does that in order to start a dialogue. And so, therefore, the very purpose you're serving with this podcast is very much part of the purpose that she was seeking to serve. Because of the observations of a past life, which again emerged out of the project of Dr. Walter Simcoe, it shows to me that souls such as Marianne Williamson, and perhaps I'd like to even include, say, ourselves in that category, enter into revolutionary times. And that the American Revolution was less about the idea of monarchy versus democracy. It really had deeper metaphysical roots that a lot of people aren't always fully aware of. For instance, the larger number of signers on the US Declaration of Independence were all Freemasons. And Freemasons essentially were a metaphysical group who, as they put it, they weren't so much a secret society as they were a society who felt that sharing things that were held in confidence with respect for privacy essentially drew people closer together. So they were really addressing not the idea of secrets, but the idea of privacy. Because they would lay out entire cities, for instance, using sacred geometry. And the reason for that is they felt that that would help aid and benefit people in commerce, sacred commerce. In fact, you can easily go online, and if you look up my hometown of Sandusky, Ohio, you will see, and if you put in Sandusky, Ohio, Freemason map, you will see a map that was laid out or surveyed by a member of the Freemasons under the auspices of Thomas Jefferson and under the inspirations of people like John Adams and also Marianne Williamson as an encourager of these kinds of phenomena. And the city was laid out to have streets that would go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, names that would be laid out in alphabetical order, and with key institutions of a democracy in the form of the post office and the courthouse, all laid out in the sacred geometry of the Freemasons, which was the famous 33 degrees compass, along with the so-called on the square or the carpenter's square, because they felt that by building a city that way, as people move to their own cities, they would be educated in the alphabet, they'd be educated in reading, they would be educated in mathematics, and they'd be educated in key historical figures that shape the consciousness of the institutions of democracy. But where we go into this a little further, because you can actually lay that map over the contemporary Google map, and you will actually see the remnants of that original Masonic map laid out in Sandusky, Ohio, where I came of age. But where this applies to the contemporary circumstance of Abigail Williams is that she's a revolutionary. And she is there to see the consciousness in advance. And that is actually what the Freemasons were all about. They felt that a republic and a democracy were the first stages of such advancements in humanity that maybe by the time of our 21st century, consciousness would become the more fundamental principle upon which nations would guide themselves. And things like sacred commerce, cities being laid out, to the natural dimensions of the seasons, because there's streets in Sandusky, Ohio, where you can see the solstices, you can see the equinoxes, because as an agricultural community of the day, it would never be out of alignment with the flow
Right.
of the seasons.
Oof. Wow.
That's
Incredible.
so beautiful. I had no idea. It's a great
Well,
story.
So do
well,
you think society's ready for someone like Marianne or Robert F. Kennedy in office?
I think that they are. I really do. I think that they've made. I think that they've made their, blueprints for consciousness very clear. I think when you really dig into like some of the background of the various persons who occupied the presidencies, they were Freemasons, so they were they were metaphysical in their inclination. And I think that many of these persons again were incarnate in that revolutionary period of time, and they're now here to help the revolution in consciousness that we're discussing here in the present. Yeah, I think folks are ready for it.
So what is this revolution of consciousness that we're into right now? I mean, I feel like I know, but then there's a part of me that is like still quite on the edge of my seat.
I would suggest it's interconnectedness, cooperation that I had with in creating a consciousness event that was actually arose through someone else's authorship. It was called the Harmonic Convergence.
Yes.
And
Yeah, Jose Arguelles.
Yep. And interestingly, returning to the subject material of my work with Shirley MacLaine, her mini series Out on a Limb came out, in which I gave a demonstration of channeling and a recreation of my first meeting with Shirley MacLaine. The harmonic convergence was the idea that if a certain number of people came together and they could trigger what's called the 100th monkey effect, or sometimes called the Maharishi effect, or Gabriel Cousins at times calls it the Isaiah effect, where when you get the right mass of people together, it is like a psychic or telepathic demonstration of democracy. And if enough people come together to meditate for peace, there will be unprecedented opportunities for peace all around the globe. And this was the roadmap that was offered by Jose Arguelles. By studying the imagery, the sacred imagery of the cycles of time of the Mayan people. And so Out on a Limb came out around February 15th or 16th, I believe, of 1987. And interestingly, that is the time of year that when you go to Egypt, there is a light that shines in the temple of Abu Simbel Re and lights up all the sacred images inside that particular temple.
Yes.
Then, on the other side of the zodiac, okay, in August, in creative opposition, the harmonic convergence occurred. And that is where millions of people around the planet got together and all simultaneously meditated for peace. And then within 3.5 years, as Jose Arguelles, as a social scientist, had predicted, the Berlin Wall came down. The Soviet Union, reorganized. The European Union evolved and came into existence. So this capacity of humanity to use consciousness engineering, per se, and elements of emotional intelligence and sacred commerce, per se, all the tools that we need to create an entire new world are accessible, in particular through the internet and programs such as these. And what is so powerful about that is we are what I call Dharma engineers nowadays. We are not only just peacekeepers, we are peace creators, and that can occur through consensus of consciousness.
Beautifully said. Really, so true. So true.
Well, I would point out, Rowan, in my journey with you and Iman, and now, Emmanuel, although Emmanuel was part of my journey because, he'd worked on the issues of sacred commerce, this idea of consciousness, and us being consciousness engineers, I think that is as close as I could get in the English language, particularly, however, saying Dharma, engineers. Because we do have karma, which is, events that have occurred in other lifetimes, and we carry those over via that wonderful incident between you and Iman, where you went and explored, that past life in Egypt, which people who go to Egypt with you will be able to see.
Yeah.
And how down through the ages, you've been consciousness engineers. And now how there's wonderful tools like the book, Sacred Commerce, or the book Executive EQ, which Iman had put together with one of the leading, experts in emotional intelligence, which are now being used in university courses. And I think it's like Buckminster Fuller said. Buckminster Fuller once said, "It isn't so much that in the 21st century you'll be living in utopia, but what's exciting about it as an engineer is we'll have all the tools to live, and we'll have all the resources to live in utopia." And I think that's the journey that you, Iman, and Emmanuel are trying to share with people in, programs such as this.
Quite charming about Iman. He was the last of all the kind of spiritual teacher types that we've been around in, in owning the Whole Life Expo, and of all the things that we, did together. Iman was always, the hardest one to put on a pedestal, because he was just so naughty and so blatantly flawed.
Yeah. Yep.
I actually felt like that there was a level of, really kind of doing that on purpose to kind of really pull that kind of blanket off of like, no, just because you're spiritual, there's nothing to do with perfection. And like it fascinated me, especially towards the end, when I really noticed that people would literally miss him, like miss the opportunity to hang out with him because of a judgment of his eating habits or his Coca-Cola, or something that was so mundane to the brilliance and the beauty of this soul. Like, and believe me, I had to step over my judgments of Coca-Cola on a regular basis, because they would rise back up and I would want to try and fix him because I really didn't like Coca-Cola. And
not just Coca-Cola, Diet Coca-Cola.
Yeah, Diet Coke. Well, that was, he was diabetic. But I almost felt like he just held on to that to keep me in check. It was like, no, I'm not going to be your perfect guy, and still appreciate me for everything I am, because everything I am is more than most people you would ever meet, like, so if you want to judge me for my Coca-Cola, you're completely missing the point. And I watched people, many people, that would miss out on collaborating with him because of judgments that they weren't willing to drop, and it kind of was like, almost, I felt like it was one of his sorting things. It was like, okay, if you're still in that realm where you want to judge, I don't want to work with you anyway. You know what I mean? Like, let me sort through here.
Yeah, let's suss this out more, because there is something really significant about that. I don't know how much, Kevin, you and I are just meeting, but I'd say since 97, I've been either adjacent or in the middle of working in what I lovingly refer to as the consciousness industrial complex. And that's kind of, there's definitely overlap between that and sacred commerce, and some of it is just kind of like a lot of opportunism. There's there's a sense of like, oh, I got an inkling of an awakening. Hey, I'm in business, let's make money at consciousness. And then all of a sudden I'm a guru. And there's these, it feels like, and then when they do that, there's a whole shift of character, like now I have to act like something. And then it almost feels like there's these whole layers of spirituality that look like people acting a certain way and judging people who don't act that certain way. And but then you'll have iconic figures that are, as you're talking about, this idea of a consciousness engineer that rub people the wrong way, perhaps. We were speaking earlier about Marianne Williamson. She's a very dynamic, strong leader, and she's also like there's these almost like attack ads or attack articles that are coming out about previous people that have said she's mean or difficult to work with. And having worked with her, there's a sharp side. There can be a direct side, but I've never like we've got to get away from these ideas that like spiritual people always do things a certain way, and if they're not doing it this way, then their relevance has been lessened somehow. And can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, well, you had mentioned your work in the conversation that we were having earlier, which may have been off camera, but it was your your work with the Joseph Campbell Institute.
Yeah.
And essentially, what people need to keep track of is that in the heroic journey, there's the trickster. And the trickster is not a trickster isn't someone who does something maliciously. They can do it in a way that's so clever that everyone finds amusement and laughter and release in it. Classic one would be, say, the mud kachinas of the Hopi people. There are all these powerful kachina dolls and dancers during Hopi ceremonies. There's the owl. There is the powerful, very popular sort of sun deities with all the eagle feathers around them. And people, can look up kachina dolls to see these things online to get an idea or to flesh out the story I'm telling. But essentially, the kachina dancers will be dancing in these very, specific circular patterns. But then the mud kachinas, who look remarkably like the court jesters of Europe,
Yes,
and they wear
yes.
bells so people can hear them if they're sneaking up on them. But they have these lariats, these ropes with a loop on them. And when the most powerful kachina dancers would reach a high point in the dance, the mud kachinas would come sneaking out and essentially throw these lariats under the feet of these powerful kachina dancers and pull their feet out from underneath them. And everyone would think it was hysterical.
Right.
It was to remind everyone how there can be joyous chaos in life. And I think that Ayman was one of those sources of joyous chaos,
Yeah.
Yeah. And essentially, I would say that his Diet Coke, was his version of just a way of pulling the feet out from people who essentially, maybe needed to take another look at themselves and where they were in their sacred journey and appreciate the nature of the trickster.
Yeah.
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 So,
So if you're on some sort of a coaching or a spiritual teaching or sharing path, there's a kind of a warning built in there to don't become too sanctimonious, don't get too high on your own supply, kind of a thing,
Or too saintly,
too saintly.
Yeah, I see it less as a warning, but hopefully it's an enlightenment or a realization.
Okay,
yeah, and built right into every spiritual system. There is what are called sources of joy or guidance. In that particular effect, there is in many spiritual societies what in English would be called joy guides. And they have a tendency to use a lot of humor. Antoine Ray has been known for using humor. And I'll give you an example of Antoine Ray's sense of humor. Antoine Ray would be speaking with people who they're they're highly sensitive, they're highly psychic, and essentially they do not do well, shall we say, in big cities. They're kind of like the country mouse and city mouse. They're kind of more like the country mouse. They like nature, and they're high empaths. They pick up on the feelings and the emotions, and they often enter into the healing arts. And they wonder, at times, because they suffer so much, picking up on the emotions and feelings of others without having like a martyr complex. What did they do in a past life? That maybe that they're suffering this way. Did they do something bad? Did they abuse their healing abilities? And Antoine Ray humorously explained to them, no. This isn't something bad you've done. You're practicing your dharma. And he went on to explain that they had many lifetimes in peace cultures, like during the time period of Hatshepsut I had described, or the Minoan culture, that when you look into the Minoan culture and their artwork, you'll find no footprint of warfare, okay? This is part of the history of peace as describing before. Right. But Antoine Ray would put it to them humorously, saying that when you go from one lifetime to another in a peace culture, you're not really prepared for a lot of the conflicts that maybe occur in some of your later incarnations, like maybe the era that, that we live in. But he puts it humorously by saying, in Egypt, we have a humorous story that says 20 lifetimes as a temple virgin does not prepare you for a wild night in the village.
Right.
Yeah. And there are other teachers, in the New Age industrial complex that have that humility. Ram Dass, was famous for stories that he would tell, about like, oh, gee, everyone thinks I'm saintly, but I wanted to sneak out one time and see, an R X-rated movie, and someone would see me and go, oh my goodness, it's Ram Dass, but then see the movie, he was going to see. But that's to break up the, in classic things, that's to break up the ego. That's to, let people know that they should have some joy in life, not seeing those movies with the source of joy on Ram Dass's part.
Yeah, and it's not the same as having deeply unresolved dynamics that are being repressed, and then they come out in devious ways. That you see a lot of people who kind of play the sanctimonious thing, and then they have some sort of terrible scandal I remember doing actually one of my most recent little forays down a Chat GPT was to kind of get a sense of who falls off the beam as spiritual teachers, and it gives me a list of kind of all the people who did it and what they did, and it included Trungpa, but it never, like, do you know who Trungpa Rinpoche from?
Yes.
Yeah. So he had he didn't get identified as having had any scandals because he was just absolutely upfront about his debauchery and his drinking and his dallies with prostitutes, and it almost felt like there's and this is a very extreme example to present someone who's kind of being upfront about it and someone who's being not upfront about it. And did you see that what Trungpa was doing was more of this trickster dynamic, or was he still someone who's kind of just letting his toxicity run amok?
Boy, I'd hate to render a judgment on someone. I'd need a little more of their biography on it. I would say it parallels things that have been said about Ikkyu, the famous Japanese poet who developed what was called Thread Zen.
Okay.
I had brought Ikkyu to Shirley MacLaine's attention. Shirley was performing on stage, And essentially, I had the good fortune to be in the audience at one of her live stage performances. And she moves with her hands a lot when she communicates. And at one moment, she noticed the audience was watching her hands. And when she looked at her hands, there was this long red thread that had sort of come from the attire she was wearing. And she just looked at the thread and hesitated a moment, says, I wonder where this red thread came from, and then just moved on to her performance. And so later in a communication with her, I said, Shirley, I think that there's maybe some past life connection to Ikkyu, or Ikkyu-san, as he's referred to, who was a Zen priest in Japan who was known for his red thread Zen. And he was known to imbibe a bit, and he was known to essentially enjoy the company of, beautiful women. And that was considered a no-no. Everybody was supposed to be celibate. But he then developed his red thread Zen, which he pointed out is that there is no Zen priest, or there's no male who ever existed who's claiming consciousness that is not connected to the feminine through the umbilical cord, the red thread, through the birth of their mother. In other words, everyone is connected to the masculine and the feminine. And so therefore he considered it a little bit not spiritually fulfilling, if you didn't acknowledge your intimate connection with the feminine. And that went on to suggest that Shirley may have actually had an incarnation with him in the form of a Biktu dancer, as they were called, and had sort of a romantic relationship with Ikkyu in that lifetime. So perhaps Trungpa Rinpoche, who I'd have to know more about his biography, was maybe an expression of the school of thought of Red Thread Zen, per se. And again, he was open about it, criticized in the same way that Ikkyu often was in his lifetime, although Ikkyu is mostly remembered for his so-called long form tea ceremony and poetry. But there are images of Ikkyu that do survive online if people would like to look him up. It's called Ikkyu. So maybe the lessons, we learned about Ikkyu are applicable to Trungpa.
Yeah, maybe. And obviously Iman had his own experience. I'm not putting myself at anybody above or below anybody, but I know that I'm pretty lenient with having a human life and on myself. I've tried to be forgiving of myself but then there's this part of me that connects with no matter what anybody says or what anybody does, including myself. At the soul level, I'm one of these engineers, and I can't I've never been able to kick that part of myself that I'm in this family. I may be the black sheep of the family. I may be doing the best I could, or maybe the worst I could, but that makes no difference. I'm in this family. You can't not make me be in this family because of something I'm doing or saying. So there's I think there's just something to learn when you see people out there that are trying to make something happen, but it doesn't always look completely perfect and polished like a Disney version of what that person should be. To look a little deeper, be a little deeper.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we go through with emotional intelligence. One of the things that have been communicated to Iman and Rowan, I think, helped evolve some of the principles in the book, is the idea that there are three emotions. There's three primary emotions mentioned in the biblical text that sometimes are looked upon as though that they're in a conflict of the issue of the divine nature. And one would be, as it goes, God is an angry God, okay? God is a jealous God, okay? And we are to fear God because it's the beginning of wisdom. So here we have fear, anger, and jealousy, often which in our society we say, oh, those are bad emotions. But through a series of channelings and through an emotional intelligence paradigm, it goes fear is really the natural ability to feel concern. Anger really is just a flash of energy that essentially says that's our ability to identify when we're not aligned, with the universe, or the flow of the areas that we can be effective in. And jealousy isn't envy, okay? It isn't envy. It really is kind of like the things that occur in sibling rivalries, where their siblings are going to be naturally jealous of each other. But as you were saying with family, it's kind of like the sibling will go, if there's outside pressure on the relationships, the siblings in their rivalry or their jealousy for each other, they'll go like, well, this is my sibling, I can pick on him, but you can't. So really jealousy is a form of ownership of energy per se. And the bottom line is, if you take those further into the emotional intelligence paradigm, if you say, what do I fear? You will get images of the 6 o'clock news in our language. But if you realize that fear is the natural ability to feel concern, and when you feel fear and you're anchored in it, and you go, what are my concerns? You'll start seeing from the higher self, the other parts of ourselves, interconnecting patterns in life where you can be effective. Mm. Then when you've noticed like, wow, this is where I could be effective, you slap your forehead and go, why did I think of that before? Okay. So there's that flash of anger that's like a lightning strike, out on the mesas. But then when you hear the thunder, the life-giving rain's coming. Okay. And then finally, when you go like, wow, this is the way I can be effective, because anger will become courage, and it gives you this infinite energy to carry out that agenda. And the final thing is, you go like, wow, I feel so powerful. If I didn't move from this spot right here, everything would flow to me. This belongs to me. That's that moment of jealousy, okay? Mm-hmm. But then jealousy, by that natural flow, will become grace, because you'll know, if I stay in this divine energy, because this is all Kundalini, everything will flow to me that I need to fulfill those effective pathways of life. And you can become more compassionate, you can become more passionate, and you have a clarity of mind, because now you're fully aligned with, the universe and the divine.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the most impressive techniques or insights, was the drop of joy technique, where he included, Ayman and Rowan included that in the book, with the drop of joy technique. Mm-hmm. as an emotional alchemy technique.
Yeah. One drop of joy transforms oceans of fear, anger, and jealousy into the process, or the rivers or the currents of life, that I was trying to articulate. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You were saying something,
hours
Rowan?
of conversations with Rowan and Ayman about that. And it's good to share that with you, man.
Yeah, it's great.
I loved watching your face. You were just kind of like lighting up a little. That was great. There it was, just a moment ago. That was great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do really feel that Ayman truly did embody the alchemist in this lifetime. When I, again, in this kind of sense of having an overview of a destiny together that I have, like there's this 30 years that is now, is a capsule, that 30 years, and the overview of what we achieve together through handling our differences and through creating this beautiful language, which really is a language of love. I mean, he is one of the most extraordinarily loving people that I have ever met in this lifetime. And he stood by people. Our societies are so judgmental about things. You do things wrong, you make a mistake, grounds for divorce, this and that, and he would, really stand by people, whether it was me or his friends, when the shit hit the fan and people were like, dropping people like flies. He would never drop them. He would never drop me. I did something stupid, he would stand by me and help me to see it. And he was really, although he was incredibly opinionated, I mean, and rightfully so, because his mind was brilliant and he had loads and loads and loads of data, more than most of us can comprehend. Yet he was still able to, in the moment of it, always drop the judgment and be there for his friends and his loved ones.
Yeah. I'm in, if one drop of joy transforms oceans of fear, anger, and jealousy, Ayman was an ocean of joy.
Yes, he was.
He was.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories about that went into the whole creation of the narrative contained in Sacred Commerce was Antunre, the spirit guide, the Egyptian spirit guide, was expressing sort of a history, an esoteric history of sacred commerce. And he had pointed out a very powerful effect that occurred in the Inca Empire, where there was this mountain of silver that the Incas would leave untouched because they believed it was sacred and was to be put to other purposes. And actually, when the Spanish, in kind of their greed, quarried out that silver eventually became stamped and was distributed all around the globe. And it is economically and historically accepted that that silver is what financed the competing nations of Spain, that then in turn led to the diminishment of Spain's influence as an empire throughout the world. So you could almost consider that the Incas' revenge, through sacred economy, where I just see it more as a leveling out, of say the global economy. So no one nation, dominated resources. But the story that I enjoy telling, because Ayman kind of enjoyed it, is there was a fairly obscure incident, apparently in the European economy, that was known, I think it's now known as sort of the tulip craze. It wasn't particularly well known at the time.
Tulip mania.
The tulip mania story. And what was fun about that in life is that this was so obscure. This incident is that in the Netherlands, which was a very, very powerful economic force at the time, tulips became such a craze and such an addiction, and everybody had to have them, that they were paying such ridiculous prices for them that it unbalanced the economy of the Netherlands, which was a real powerhouse within the European economy at that time. And when Ayman first heard that story, because the tulips had originated from Africa, and essentially, Antunre had suggested that this was one of the things that the Nubian priesthoods had done, to level out the economy because it was becoming overheated around the planet. And while we now know that as a historical incident, it was so obscure that Ayman, when he communicated this to check details for what went into the book, whether its historical viability, there was a gentleman whose background was in economic history. And he goes, that's pretty obscure. I can't recall any disruption of the European economy, or anything to that effect. And so this incident wasn't known to Ayman. It wasn't known to this gentleman with, historical economic knowledge. But Ayman just sat there with this big grin on his face going like, wow, wait till this guy finds out that this really existed. And I got it from this, 3,000-year-old Egyptian. And the gentleman said like, wow, I looked into history and you're absolutely correct about this tulip mania. He said, where did you find out about it? And Ayman explained, well, it came from this old Egyptian guy. That's one of my favorite stories about Ayman, is impishness. He's like, I can't wait for this guy to find out where this came from. And he didn't know about it.
I wonder who we,
that'd be one of those, good humility stories, per se. But that would be typical Ayman too.
I wonder who we think for crypto.
It may be our latest tulip craze for all we know.
Oh yeah, they're always doing there's always some new tulip that's hitting the market.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the art economy is a lot like that because it's
Mm.
unregulated and it's controlled by an elite group of people who says this is valued at that, and, you know, et cetera, et
Right,
cetera.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it seems like there's an aspect in the history in sacred commerce, and I'd love to ask you about this. And it'll
Mm-hmm.
probably seed either a future episode with you or someone who's deeply knowledgeable on the history of the Knights Templar. But the Knights
Mm.
Templar in the book really provide this cultural bridge through their
Mm-hmm.
excavations, and I'm just curious if did that information come through you, or is that through someone else that angle was introduced to the book?
To the best of my knowledge, the elements of the esoteric history did include the issues of the Knights Templar as sort of like reopening the ancient silk routes, reopening the ancient trade routes between the Byzantine and the Middle East and India. You know, in particular in the Crusades, you know, to Jerusalem. But one of their unique contributions was the idea that they would not only guard people along the trails for the purposes of the trade routes, for purposes of commerce, they actually had helped establish elements of what is considered the contemporary banking system, where you are able to take the equivalency of a marker or a letter of credit, deposit your resources with them, you know, where it's secure, like in a modern bank, then be able to travel safely with this letter of credit to another destination and virtually exchange it because it had their stamp on it for an equal value of goods, you know, in any kind of trade action you were carrying out. And that's considered by many historians, and Ayman, with his economic background, was, you know, found that rather marvelous. That was one of the foundations of a, you know, of a unit of our modern economic circumstance that allows us to carry out the nature of sacred commerce, because the key was the Knights Templars were so well trusted that it was actually an act of faith or consciousness, and that was a primary example or earlier precursor to our consciousness-based economics.
And as Dharma engineers or consciousness engineers, did how intentional was that? Was it just by happenstance? I mean, they are the predecessors of the Masonic tradition, and
Mm-hmm.
and I know they've been in abeyance for almost 800 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and but there was this the sense that they impacted Europe with dynamics around democracy, preceding
Mm-hmm.
the Magna Carta, seeding Europe with the tales of Arthur and the
Mm-hmm.
Knights of the Round Table, which carried that mythos carried a lot of, I guess, authority challenging principles
Mm-hmm.
and seeded it into the consciousness. Was that something that one of the beings you work with was providing insights onto, or is that something that yeah I don't
Yeah, well, that's I would point out that yes, I felt that Spirit was offering insights, you know, to Hyman, and that's why I refer to it as an esoteric history narrative. I think it agrees with multiple points of traditional history, but the insight about, say, the tulip mania, if you go and if you study the memorial temple of Hatshepsut, you'll see that it's pretty much a blueprint for what the Knights Templar were all about, because that little tiny marching army could have been a perfect blueprint as to the function that an organized, you know, human protective agency could help carry out commerce rather than warfare, you know, for instance.
yeah.
So I would say by the time you created linkage between the different elements of the narrative contained in sacred commerce, you can see that these were institutions passed on exactly as you said, through myth. Because as you're probably familiar with Joseph Campbell and Jung, the idea that myth is a story of something that didn't exist, it isn't that. Myth is a vehicle or story or human consciousness agency that passes on either a historical or a psychic truth. And that to me is what sacred commerce is. It's a esoteric narrative looking at the linkage over time of humanity's great myth story that preserve both historical truths and the psychic truths that make them worth living, that can allow us to be Dharma engineers.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And I always like the idea that myth is, Lazarus always referred to myth as being the current, the electricity, the current that has the ability to take us home. Mm-hmm. So it's an awakening current. And so that myth that is woven in, and that's what, Iman took so much joy in, was creating that myth of commerce as an evolutionary agent for transformation that we could tap into in our modern times and could, accelerate our evolution. And it does, because if you take relationship as, as a real mirror, meaning like if Emmanuel pisses me off in our company, it's not Emmanuel, it's his mirror to me of what I need to deal with. Then when you're in business, you have like 10 and 20 and 40 and 100, and depending on how big your business is, mirrors that you're dealing with. And so your ability to use your emotional intelligence and move through stuff has got to ramp up massively. And I mean, I can attest to it, like when we had Whole Life and, and all the things we've built, like the amount of feedback and growth and the rapidness of growth that we went through once we started building everything out into, bigger and bigger renditions was amazing. And then having that last 3 years together in this, in this pod, this 30-year pod, where I was thinking we were failing because the businesses weren't really happening. And now I'm like, oh my God, no, we had to have that 3 years to review everything we'd done in this lifetime together, to be able to harvest the thing so that we could both go on to our next level, his next level being levels of joy that we now can't even imagine in our bodies, which I know he's experiencing. And of course, my next level being taking this all forward in, in our very physical world that we all still inhabit.
Yeah. It's literally a journey, that we're all on, and we're all mirrors for each other as being described. And, even in our conversation here, I think what people can note is that we're telling a series of stories, some of them very personal, some of them more esoteric, some of them reflecting on other people's stories and how they fit into a journey. I had described the story of your Egyptian past life. I've described how, the Hatshepsut Memorial Temple can be a blueprint, for today. And one of the things when I was in Egypt, having gone there like 20 plus times, was how excited. There was an Egyptologist one time. When I explained to him, I said, well, I said, my understanding of this mural we're standing in front of, carved into the wall for the ages by Hatshepsut, you could really look at it and see it as a blueprint for peace. And he just like lit up, he just lit up. And he was just so excited that something from the history of his country, could be appreciated for what he knew and was aching to tell people, but always had to give the dry history, of the era per se, but to see the deeper psychic insights into the story that have been preserved for us, down through the ages, and acted on the ancestors like the Freemasons or or the Knights Templar, as we were discussing, and that there's continuity to that. That's not a conspiracy. That is a series of historical linkages as to the way consciousness has been impacted individuals and inspired them even into, you know, our present era, and that we can harness that consciousness and be, again, as we say, Dharma and consciousness engineers. And I think that Ayman was one of the premier Dharma engineers of our era. Yeah.
Wow. Incredible. Well, where can people find out more about you and work with you, Kevin?
Oh, that's pretty simple. If you just put in my name, lowercase letters, kevinryerson.com, that will take them right to our premier website. It's just this nice little website. Everything's real clear. It looks like it's about 30 years old, even before the internet existed. I like that kind of charming Victorian, you know, or mid-century quality to it. But it will take you to a more contemporary page as far as some of our scheduling and available times that, you know, I'm available either through class structures, maybe some travel, or through individual consultations. So just Kevin Ryerson.
Little footnote, Kevin and I will be doing a Merchant Priest Egypt tour in the next couple of years, so watch out for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Okay.
What a joy.
Okay.
I'm sure there'll be more.
Excellent take. Well, thank you for having me on the program today. I really enjoyed our conversations.
Yeah,
me too. Very much.
And to all of our fellow Dharma engineers out there.
Yes, indeed. Be in touch.